We have 4 people joining us now. Anthony Jansko, who is the co-founder of Accelerate SF. This is the organization that is putting together this upcoming hack event, which I think has the potential to be as transformative of that stuff as we did before. Then also joining us is Kat, and how do we pronounce your last name? Yes. Kat's a CEO of Builtly, which uses urban data, spatial stuff. So a real person with real data and real apps we're going to learn from. Kim Palese, come on up. Kim, I've known for years. We actually met when she was on the original Java team, and then formed several companies and is now working on a new form of Civic AI. And also joining us is Mickey, if he's still here, who's going to come back and help us bring it home. Okay.
My congregation.
Yes. Oh, good. Yes.
Do you believe in the gummy bear?
Well, Mick, we believe in the power of AI to transform us. So you'll bring us home in a few minutes. Anthony, I wanted to introduce you, formerly from Palantir. Can you tell us a little bit about what's coming up with this Accelerate SF Hackathon? What inspired you, and what are you seeing in terms of what hack teams are working on? And what's your request of this group of the kind of things we might do?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Peter. Hey, everyone. So Jordan Wick and I myself went to a number of these AI events, actually just like yourself. As you know, there are so many of these AI events, hackathons every weekend. And we saw that people, engineers are building interesting solutions. They are playing around with new technologies. It's super interesting. But at the same time, many of these solutions that they build are not really used by anyone. They are building interesting, sales agents, interesting knowledge management applications. But at the same time, SF San Francisco is full of challenges. So Jordan and I were like, asked ourselves a question like, what would it take to bring together all of these people to create a platform where they can actually build solutions for real-world problems? So the two of us started reaching out to different public sector organizations, both in the government and non-profits outside of the government. And we started gathering different problems that the city faces. And so the idea is that we would take these problems to the event, to the hackathon next weekend, and engineers would build solutions to these working together. They would first build the prototypes of these solutions, and then after the hackathon, they would work on deploying these.
Well, let's talk about what some of those are. Can you give me, what do you see as the ones that pop to the top?
Yeah, so as you all know, the most important challenges in San Francisco are in homelessness, housing, and in crime. So we were also trying to find specific tech problems in these areas. For instance, in housing, we believe that it would be really useful for businesses to have some sort of AI application, a software application that checks permit applications before businesses submit these applications. This would make sure that these permit applications are not thrown back, and that the permit process is as fast as possible. So this is one example. There are some examples within the government as well. So there is a website called Open Book. This essentially aggregates all the financial data within the San Francisco government. So for instance, all the contracts that the SF government awards to different companies. And it's currently super hard to use because the interface is from the early 2000s. And so we were like, why don't we just build a large language model application that would enable public servants to ask questions and understand how they actually spend the data, because this is something that is currently very hard to do today.
There was another one. Let's talk about what we were talking to the mayor about. So people often say, why is it so tough to get stuff done in the city? The last time a lot of stuff got done was when the city charter was written or rewritten, when Willie Brown was mayor. And as I mentioned a moment ago, it's kind of a word salad of stuff upon stuff. And one of the ideas here is we could bring that into a model and query it in English, both to find out what the rules are, but also to write new legislation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we saw that like the public sector is full of these text problems essentially, and at the same time, engineers are not really building solutions to these. So we really just want to like expose these opportunities and have engineers build solutions to them. And just like Peter said, the city charter would be an interesting place to look for solutions and challenges.
I think one way of looking at it is there's a few buckets. One is existing city assets, services or data that are just not optimal to get to. You gave an example of two. Another might be our 311 system that is kind of an old-fashioned way of navigating. So that's cool because there's some investment. There's stuff that made sense, but maybe we're only getting 60 or 80% utility out of it, but we could make it easier to use, faster, understand it more. There's another bucket that, and this is what you'll talk about, Kat, all of the spatial data stuff, right? The permit stuff, what we know real estate or what we know about performance of a location. Location data is core to cities, and so when we have the kind of stuff you do, plus language models, plus some of the things that may be able to visualize, like there's a company called In Situ, which will be one of the developers you'll have access to. It can take city planning data, like permit applications, and then visualize what all those buildings will look like, because we know height and setbacks, so it basically paints the future skyline, and you might build a what-if application. What if we maximized all the density we're allowed to do? How many more units could we build? So all these things are kind of possible. And there's a third bucket, which is storytelling, which is that silly Halloween app that I gave an example of would be one example of that. Okay, give us the details, like when is it, and what kind of talent are you looking for in advance of this?
So there are 3 more days before the deadline. The hackathon is coming up next weekend. We hope that this will be the first hackathon in a series of hackathons. You're all encouraged to apply. If you know about challenges in San Francisco that you think tech could address or solve, then we are very interested in hearing from you. You can go on accelerate_SF on X and tell us more about these challenges.
I think it's important to note that not just developers, because English is the new code. We'd like liberal arts people. We'd like citizens. We'd like people who actually care about things and never had the chance to write code before, because code had to be written by engineers who went to school for a particular thing. So maybe try to encourage people to come that come from different domains as well.
And to put a point on that, what we learned in that last set that I put up there is you need people who can write the APIs and are developers. You also need people who understand city problems, right? So these could be activists or nonprofit people who understand, for example, if you're trying to do a housing thing, where do you find what housing is available? Where's the friction point? People who've worked with the homeless or worked with folks in addiction, right? So that's incredibly useful. Sometimes journalists are useful because they write about problems and wish something was done. And my favorite category are frustrated bureaucrats who know there's a problem and no one will build something for them, right? So that's where that diversity works.
Maybe a few designers or design researchers that know how to actually do human-centered design and design for people instead of designing for geeks.
That's a great idea. Let's move on to Kat. And you and I were just introduced by kind of a mutual friend in the spatial community. So tell us about Builty and the kind of the range of problems you address and the data you have and how that might feed into a pipeline of what people can work on.
Thank you, Peter. Hello, everybody. My name is Kat. I'm the founder of Builty, where we collect data on building permits. And we talked about open data, right, that cities started to become to make available after 2008, which is great. However, that data is so difficult to analyze because it's still in its textual format that it's nearly impossible to say something like how many new housing units were built in a specific year in a specific zip code that are larger than 2,000 square feet. This data is very textual. It is very free-form. For example, a homeowner or a contractor can come up with an example description and submit to the building permit department. And it stays as is. There are no standards. There are no controls in terms of what goes into the description. There can be as little or as much information as they come up with. So now our goal is to parse that text into very structured data set that we then make available for all kinds of modeling and predictions. That is a short description of what we do, and my company actually started from my personal journey of building. I built an ADU, accessory dwelling unit, in the city of Walnut Creek, and I was curious about ADU trends in Walnut Creek for the last 5 years, and I scraped the city permit department because their data is not in open data. And I published it on a Facebook group, and people started asking for the same exact data set for San Jose, San Francisco, San Diego, Los Angeles, and then eventually across the country. And the difficulty about this data set is the granularity of it. This data resides at the city level, so we're talking about 20,000 different jurisdictions across the country. So we're building 20,000 data pipelines at Builty. That's our challenge and a lot of fun.
You had some great stories about just both the different categories of names and also the breadth. Like you were telling me this story about Miami and inspection data.
Yes, thank you. Well, actually, to stick with accessory dwelling units,
Yeah.
there are at least 200 different terms that are used to describe an accessory dwelling unit. They range from ADU to accessory dwelling unit to secondary unit to Ohana unit in Hawaii.
Yeah.
And as we're adding new jurisdictions into our data pipeline, we're learning more and more terms. So that is our goal, to standardize and unify this data. Now, different terms and different abbreviations are always newly created by jurisdictions, and they can mean completely different things based on the city. For example, SD stands for single dwelling in San Francisco or secondary dwelling in San Diego, and those are completely different things. So any LLMs that we apply on this data, they just get confused. In fact, to understand this data and to clean it, we have to build our own model to read the building permit lingo, to then structure it for the purpose of AI and ML for doing any kinds of modeling and predictions on top of that clean data. So many use cases we keep coming up with. For example, Freddie Mac is someone we're talking to. They're very interested in our data. They are trying to avoid the collapsing condo in Miami that happened a few years ago, and there was a $1 billion insurance payout based on that. Another interesting example is the latest fires in Maui. If you've seen a picture, there's this house with a red roof that survived the fires, and everything around it burned down. It's crazy. It looks like the house was photoshopped, literally. I'll have to send it to you if you haven't seen the picture. But we've pulled the permits on that house, and it turns out that they replaced a roof from asphalt to metal. That was one of the biggest factors why the house survived. And then they did a clearing of the brush around the house. So knowing things like that for homeowners to know how can I build and use the best methods for my house to survive in a fire, or for cities to have some guidance about these building codes and building permits. Those are some of my favorite use cases.
What's the insight or the kind of data you want to pull in to help Freddie Mac figure out which buildings are in danger of collapsing?
A building that hasn't had an elevator inspection in a while, or some buildings that failed inspections would be one. And it's more of an absence of, like a roof hasn't been replaced in 30 years, very old staircases, and a lot of examples like that. We also have a lot of data on complaints and code violations, so that too goes into Freddie Mac's modeling.
And who are your biggest economic customers?
Insurance companies today, but we do work with a few local governments in California to help them understand their own data. We helped a city of Roseville and Placer County and Kern County to file their annual housing reports, for example. And they needed our data because even though they were the ones who produced it, it's so difficult to read, is it a single-family dwelling or a townhome or a condo, that they need extra help cleaning their own data.
And final question, here we're going to have an event where we have 150 capable developers hungry to build something, various activists who no doubt will be coming in and saying we have to solve the homeless and the housing problem. What are the kind of things you'd love to inspire teams to work on or prototype, both to advance the work you're doing and get people to kind of understand this whole domain?
Well, if we were talking about bureaucracy, for example, in San Francisco, our data shows that building permit approvals are about 2 years behind. So they have a 2-year backlog. So maybe looking at all the permits and seeing where are the culprits, where the permits get denied, what kind of information is not provided during the initial application, and what's needed to speed up the process. That would be one. And then how can this data be entered in a way that it's understandable and readable? Because language of building permits is not English today. And another great use case is home valuations based on the neighborhoods and based on the demographics of a specific neighborhood. Are the existing values of the homes correct, or are they biased against or for certain demographic areas?
I hope you get a sense that this is exactly the kind of augmentation process that a government might not do, but would make a city so much easier to experience and use. When Tim O'Reilly came up with the concept of Gov 2.0 back in the Web 2 era, the whole point was there's a whole bunch of stuff that the private sector could do to go build apps and such. But here, because we now have the ability for data to, or for language models to kind of reason, answer questions, go across sectors, it gives us, it just feels like a much greater oversight capacity, questioning capacity, which is, I think, much of what we are interested in unlocking. So we want to thank you for your participation here.
Thank you.
Okay, Kim, you and I have known each other for years. We actually met because when you were launching Java, which was, I guess, sometime in the 90s? Yes. Right, and I had a startup, and we were going to be a Java partner. I think we knew each other socially, and then I went over to your house one night and dropped off a bunch of press releases, and we've been collaborating on various things ever since. You're working, you have a startup that's focused on crowdsourced information, CrowdSmart, which looks at how one might do city planning or kind of getting people to collaborate using forms of forward-looking AI as opposed to models that just repaint the past and predict stuff. Kind of give us a lens into that.
Absolutely. Is this on?
Is it on?
Just grab a mic next to you and we'll
You've got
unmute.
many mics coming your way.
Thank you, Peter.
Yeah.
Yes, so we're using large language models in an entirely different way. Instead of the approach of ingesting text, existing text, and then pattern matching language, which is incredibly powerful for all sorts of different applications, as we've been talking about. We also need to integrate the ability for humans to interact with these systems. And so we're using large language models to actually draw meaning from conversation, from collective discourse between people. And the AI actually acts like a facilitator. The AI seeks, using open-ended questions, seeks answers from, could be, dozens, hundreds, thousands, even millions of people, and then enables them to engage in a conversation. So the large language models are actually learning themes that are emerging from the conversation. It's seeking diverse ideas. It is optimizing for diversity of thought and outlier ideas while also finding common ground and seeking points of alignment, which is what the best human facilitators do if you've ever been in a room with a really good facilitator. Well, that's what the AI in this case is doing. And so you can imagine the use cases are immense for this. We actually started by focusing on just to verify whether this technology actually was predictively accurate and helped people, create breakthrough solutions. We applied it to startup investing, which is a very difficult area to make predictions of success because there's not a lot of data, and it really involves people talking and debating whether this startup might have a shot at succeeding. And so we created a collective intelligence method of evaluating startups, sourced startups out of university accelerators, built a community of about 2,500 people, had 35 to 45 people per startup doing the evaluation, and the people were not necessarily professional investors. Oftentimes they were users, potential users of the product, or people who understood that industry, were inside that industry. And it turned out that the AI, again, was facilitating the conversation and learning from the humans and what they knew. Turned out it was over 80% accurate at predicting which companies would go from seed to Series A or a significant up round. And the other benefit here is, one of the other benefits is reduces ingrained bias. It's ideas are surfaced, the identities are masked. So it's all about, again, optimizing for diversity of thought and ideas, and also encouraging transparency. It turned out over 40% of the high-scoring companies were founded by women or underrepresented founders, which was a side effect of reducing ingrained bias. So when we realized this thing is really working, we knew that it was the ability to apply it in particular to enabling citizens to problem solve, to come up with breakthrough solutions to really tough problems was a natural place for this to be used. It's also a place where AI really needs to go. We need to, in addition to ingesting and making sense of existing knowledge, we need to enable human beings to actually interact with each other and help identify sort of the best ideas and the breakthrough solutions that come, to Mickey's point, when people are actually collectively reasoning together. And so that's what we're doing.
So I think this could be like an acceptation engine, which I'm very excited about, based on what I was talking about. Can you clarify you said that the model when you were doing the investing, the idea was you had a bunch of early startups and there's some industry norm for how accurate people's predictions are that they'll get another round of funding or something like that. What's the industry norm, and then what did your system do, just so that we've got a very clear comparison?
Okay, so the industry norm for predicting which companies will go from seed to Series A or a significant increase in valuations, about 20 to 30%. That's good VC firms are kind of at that level. Outliers are maybe at 60 or 70%. This was over 80%.
Yeah. So this system was like just head and shoulders above, and it was about sort of collective action and common pool resources, but also diversity of thought and things like that.
Exactly.
Which none of the systems that are the current sort of state of generative AI actually care about or have been designed from a structural standpoint or a theoretical standpoint.
That's
to
right.
do.
Yeah. And so we're very excited about applying this to civic engagement and local democratic involvement by citizens about policies and issues that affect them in their neighborhoods. So we're being increasingly sort of pulled into a bunch of different experiments to help citizens in different towns across the country and other parts of the world problem solve together.
Sounds like the anti-Twitter. Anyway, go ahead.
Oh, yes.
It is, indeed.
Which is, yes. It's a great description because it becomes easier every day to be the anti-Twitter. It's also interesting that the customer for that's always interesting. So one obvious customer is the city's trying to figure something else, but you're also talking to news organizations, like these emerging local news, a lot of local newspapers going out of business, being replaced by smaller online efforts that are less about breaking news and more about solving community problems.
Right. And there's a very interesting kind of movement. It's not getting a lot of attention, but there was recently an announcement about $500 million that's being invested in local newspapers in buying, and then instead of sort of the model that's been happening, which is private equity firms buy these local newspapers, kind of strip them, and then extract value from them. In this case, there's a movement to buy local newspapers or help fund them, invest in them, and help them actually thrive and serve the community rather than optimizing for profit. And so one of the most interesting things these small town newspapers want to do is actually engage citizens in conversation, in collective discourse about the issues that matter to them most in their cities, in their communities. So we are embarking on a partnership with these new organizations, one in particular that is emerging. It's something called Town Hall AI, which is all about partnering with local newspapers and enabling citizens to actually problem solve together at scale.
Right. We're really opening up a new lens into what is possible here. Final question before we turn to Mickey. Well, you're going to be, we could actually cheat here. You're going to be a judge at this hackathon. What might you inspire our development teams and people here to work on? Or what are the kinds of things you would love to see emerge from all of this based on your both years of experience and the capacity of the San Francisco developers?
Well, I've been shooting ideas over to the team, and there are an amazing number of very exciting ideas that I know people are going to be creating all sorts of interesting hacks and apps for. But the area that I get most excited about is people finding common ground, actually realizing that even if your neighbor has a different political persuasion from you do, what yours is. We actually agree on something really important, and that ability for people to realize that they have more in common than they have that makes them different is, to me, going to be one of the most important breakthroughs from this.
Mickey.
Wait. I have a question for,
Yes.
well, not a question for Kim. So a comment about so the reason you should pay attention to Kim is probably a lot of machines, vehicles, other things are like getting updates every day from your company called Marimba. So like every Tesla in the world gets an over-the-air update. All these IoT devices out there in the world largely use Kim's stuff. And so she's seen this before, and she knows where things are going, and she's learned so much. So I feel like it's really important to
Thank you, Mickey.
pay attention. She's going to be a judge.
Yes, be on your toes.
Beware.
But I'm very used to being about a decade too early. It feels like this is actually, to your point, rushing at us even faster. So yes, the future will be here momentarily.
Actually, this is an interesting quick story. Everybody now knows Java as a very successful thing at Sun that kind of pioneered the act of a programmable internet, but it actually rolled around as a deeply failed thing for interactive television for a while, right? And then the internet showed up, and kind of in that pregnant moment of something new, it flipped over to a new medium and took off.
That's right. We were just trying to figure out how to get this thing out to the world because we knew it would be needed, but it was too early for smartphones or interactive TV or whatever. And then we were essentially sort of being wound down and reabsorbed into the company. And then Mosaic came along. We downloaded it, realized we could rewrite the browser in this technology. It was called Oak at the time, and bring interactivity to the web. And that kind of was, for us, the breakthrough. It was also serendipitous because, who knows what would have happened to this technology if not for Mosaic coming along.
Right, and as Mick points out, we're at this fascinating moment of convergence of a bunch of these technologies, and unpacking how language models or storytelling can be applied to the urban context is a little bit not obvious because most of us have just been paying attention to other things. And I was deeply into this stuff, right? And then we went through, let's see what happened. We had a Trump election, everybody got worried about that. And then we had a pandemic that took our minds off of it. And then San Francisco went into a crisis. And then suddenly we showed up there's a lot of work to be done. And then Anthony showed up and said, we're doing a hackathon on it. And so it's kind of like getting some band back together. But I think we're all learning in real time what those moves are. And there's no one to tell us more about those moves and what might be than Mickey.
I have no idea where Peter's going with this.
But you don't need to, because we live in a world of predictive models, and so that setup should be enough between the... Okay, Mick has been a good friend of mine for years. He was at Autodesk. Well, first of all, he started a design firm, which I think he mentioned earlier, that was working on kind of innovative creative solutions for years. He was at Autodesk, where several years ago he led generative AI as applied to design, which means you give it a spec and it would imagine what the building or the chair or what the most optimal way of doing a piece of architecture was, which at the time everyone looked at and thought it was magic voodoo. Now we realize, is Dad using GPT-4? But it was leading at the time. Now you're at BCG, the consulting agency, and you're advising enterprises, because if you run a big company, you're completely freaked. What's my AI strategy on how to learn AI strategy? So one question I have is, how would you advise our city on what the opportunities are, and then our whole resource that can push on the city and create as we go into this hackathon week?
I don't know. I think on the city side, I would say more, let's get that data out there so that people can do things with it. I think data is the new gold, and it's also the new asbestos. And I think we have to be careful of this thing because we're gonna have challenges with it. The other thing is, I'm very nervous right now about bias, algorithmic bias, as well as data bias, as well as the flavor of the developer themselves in terms of their own culture and background, not having a sense of other of others. I would encourage everybody before the event to read Joy Buolamwini's brand new book, which is coming out this week. She found that all these large models that actually were for vision systems, and they were used by police and they were used for inspection and things like that, didn't see her because she was African American, and she had to go buy a white face mask and sneak it into her dorm room and like put it on so that she could use this vision model to be able to put trees across her face, or she'd grab her white roommate and put it in there. And she realized she needed to build an algorithmic justice league. And so she's been working on an algorithmic justice league for the last few years, and she just came out with her first book about this. She was doing that at Georgia Tech as an undergrad, and then she's gotten her PhD at MIT. And she's doing some amazing work. Another amazing book that's really worth reading is called Algorithms of Oppression. And it was written by Sophia Umoji Noble. Riveting, scary, but if I were doing a civic hackathon, I would want to make sure that we have ethicists, that we have a diversity of thought and diversity of culture and diversity of education and diversity of mindset and diversity of gender, just because hybrid vigor works. When you have monoculture, that's how a species dies. Hybrid vigor in nature, in biology, is actually what lets us thrive in adversity. It's what lets us thrive in disruptive situations. And so we need that right now more than ever, because all the things that are coming at us are outrageous. And it's just, in many ways, it's just the rising of unbounded malignant complexity. It's kind of what happens with technology. If you really want to understand technology, I said technology is the capturing of some phenomena in the universe. You know, social sciences have captured what happens between our ears. The human sciences capture that, the physics and things like that. E equals MC squared is a really amazing compression algorithm for a very big body of knowledge around how energy works and how mass works. But we really need to learn more about humans. I think the social sciences and the human sciences, all those spaces have been very soft for a really long time. And people call them the soft sciences, but I actually think they're the hardest sciences of all. Rocket science is just not that big a deal anymore. But social science is really hard. And so if I were investing, I would say, how do we do collective action? How do we do common pool resources? I noticed that not one of the platforms that have been built today implement Elinor Ostrom's 8 design principles for collective action and common pool resources. But we've discovered them over and over again over hundreds of years in how lobster fisheries actually deal with disputes, how to actually reduce trolling and other kinds of things. These are common, well-understood design patterns that not one tech founder has ever heard of. And I think I'd like to see us actually get smarter about that side of things. So I would encourage the community here, I'd encourage people building startups and also the city to start looking at this and really understand how evolutionary biology works, because we actually build cities. We build civilization. Like, that's amazing. But we have this cartoon in our head that it's like the lone founder, hero, the Steve Jobs, the fill-in-the-blank political monster running Twitter or whatever. It's this idea that one person is the epic founder and the epic whatever, and that's just not actually how evolutionary biology works. We work together and we work collectively, and I think I'm super excited by CrowdSmart and what's possible there, because it's the wave after generative AI, frankly, and I think it's going to have some new things going on. But I'd love to see us focus more on those underlying things. And if you don't know who Elinor Ostrom is, she won a Nobel in 2000 something.
I think it was 7?
7.
Yeah.
For this whole space. And we could implement it. In fact, when World of Warcraft tried getting rid of trolling in millions of people playing video games, they implemented some of these patterns, and they saw a dramatic drop in trolling. And they saw a dramatic rise in people like adopting a good culture again and not having to get kicked out, but actually stopping, don't swear, don't call people names, things like that. So they just implemented some of these patterns in a large-scale study. Wired has documented it, and it's a beautiful study about what would happen if we actually understood humans and society.
In a moment, I'm going to ask you the question, how would you form a challenge that people could work on over the weekend that might give us a tangible example of some of Elinor Ostrom's principles? And while you think about that, a quick story about Eleanor Ostrom. So as Mick pointed out, she won the Nobel Prize because native peoples for years cooperated and figured out how to get fisheries to work and solve collective problems. But the question was, could that be done at scale in like a large economy? I think she won in either 2007 or 9. On the other side of that, I think 2009, if she was 7, Meyerson won for mechanism design, which was essentially how you implement incentives, what we call gamification, at scale to get populations to behave and change their behavior. So you put the two of them together and you get something powerful. Right in the middle, in 2008, he didn't get a Nobel Prize, but Satoshi did release a white paper about mechanisms to implement this stuff, which was cryptocurrency. So those 3 years were a great deal of raw innovation power. And now to the question to you, if we wanted to issue a challenge to people who had not thought about this, but could apply this to this fair city, how might you frame something for people to think about this week and go to work on the weekend?
Yeah, I think, well, yeah. Go find out those 8 design patterns. They're pretty straightforward. Graduated sanctions, build trust through different mechanisms, things like that. But the other thing I would do is, I would very early on, if I were a team, I would create some vertical columns that were the challenges. Like, these are the challenges, this is the big problem, this is the subset of that problem, et cetera, for whatever the challenges the team is targeting. And then if that's the columns, for the rows, I would put the 8 design principles. And just basically see what happens when you do a creative grid, when you basically let those two things have sex, and see what kinds of things pop out of those. Because I think you would end up discovering little nuggets of things that you could do. The other thing I might do is I might actually think about, what does generative AI actually give us that we didn't have with machine learning 3 years ago? So it used to be that you'd build a data factory, you'd take different models, and the factory, just like the car factory puts cars out and starts with wood and steel and things and workers and stuff like that, you put data in, and at the end of a classic data factory, you get predictions, you get process automation, and you get pattern matching. But what's really interesting is that with generative AI, you get that's like 5 or 3 Ps. You get actually 5 Cs. And so the other thing I might do is I might do a grid where I actually put the challenges in one dimension, and then I put the things that generative AI uniquely can do in the other dimension. And those would be converse. We've already seen that with bots and things like that. You can have conversations and you can go back and forth. Coach. You can actually, the gold medal approach to helping students or helping citizens or helping anyone learn is Socratic conversations. And we're finding amazing things happening with saying, please explain this to me like a 10-year-old, or please question me about these things as if you're an irate citizen or customer. And so you can actually use it for coaching. So converse, coach. Comprehend, I kind of say loosely. It doesn't really have a theory of mind or anything like that. There's no mental model, no structural reasoning that you might find in a 9-month-old infant. But what it can do is it can take things and synthesize them down. It can help you comprehend things, because you can say, explain this to me like a first time this, or why don't you come up with the 5 reasons this won't sell and act like you're a VC or act like you're a BCG consultant or whatever, and come up with what framework I'm missing for my business model. So you can do that as well. It can also create. My face is created by typing some words on a video of my face, and then it generated a bunch of stuff. So it's like a web search for things that don't exist. What might we create that we haven't been able to do before? And lastly, it can command. You can say, go ahead and take this picture of a whiteboard I drew of a web page with circles and blobs and arrows that say wait for this, and then loop, and then do this, and then ask for the login and do this. You can take a picture of it now with like ChatGPT-4, V, and you can say write the code for it, find the bugs after you've run the code, find out a way to actually deploy it, generate some images. You can put together an entire chain of commands. So I would put create, converse, I don't even remember these, comprehend, command, and coach on the vertical axis, and I would put the challenge on the horizontal, and I would see what uniquely could we do with generative AI.
In our lightning round now, we're actually going to continue in this spirit of working on the hackathon. It is a fact that Anthony and Kat, you never met each other before today, right? Because you signed on the team just this week. I'd love to hear a little conversation between the two of you on, Anthony, maybe you ask about how the pipeline works and then how our teams might work together. In other words, here's a resource, a developer with a toolkit. What are the questions you might ask to kind of inspire, to understand how it works and how it's available, that might both inspire teams and also because we're curious to learn and we only have a week to go.
Yeah, of course. There's a website called Data SF, and San Francisco releases most of its data on that website, and I'm really curious to see how we could use particularly the building codes or building inspection complaints to build something useful for the city based on the most useful use cases that you guys are working with.
Was that a question?
Yeah, I'm curious to hear how you guys, what are the most interesting use cases? What would be the most useful for SF in your opinion?
And also, how does it work? Is it an API or is it a query and then we get text back? Like, what do people need to know to use your stuff with other stuff?
Got it. Can you hear me, by the way?
Great.
Okay, great. So we do have an API, and we'll make that available for the hackathon. We also deliver data via flat files, but it sounds like for the hackathon, APIs are what you guys are working with. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
The most interesting use cases, as I mentioned, it depends on how you're looking at the data. I think in building permits, we actually have information on 4 Ps. We call it 4 Ps. Information on people, properties, projects, and places. So if you are trying to analyze homeowner behavior and what people build in what areas, that is available. We know the owners, we know the contractors that they hire, we know how quickly certain projects get built. So that's the people piece. There is a part on properties. For a specific address, you know permit history, and you can make all kinds of derivations in terms of its value today based on all the changes that were made over the last 30 years. When it comes down to projects, you can say, in the city of San Francisco, where are the solar panels being installed? Or what are the most popular zip codes for solar panels? And when it comes down to places, that's where we have information on the jurisdiction itself. So San Francisco Planning and Building Department, how quickly they approve permits, how many people this planning review process goes through, what kinds of projects get denied, and basically what can be done to speed up this sort of process. And what you get is a table with rows and columns with all the data that you get from datasf.org, and it's enriched with additional columns not available from that table. For example, we scrape inspections data, we scrape all the custom schema that is not available through that website. And what we do through our language models, we structure the data in a tabular format. So if square footage, for example, is in the text, you'll see it in a separate column. Then you'll see, if it's a solar project, you'll see solar panel capacity as a separate column. So there will be up to maybe 400 different columns that you can do any sort of modeling on.
Okay, super interesting. There are a few organizations that we talk to, like Yes in My Backyard or Housing Coalition Action. I think it would be particularly interesting to invite them as well to the hackathon and maybe ask them what's something that they would benefit the most from. I believe it's probably the permit approval and the permit processing timelines and how that could be accelerated. That's probably the most interesting for them.
Cool.
What's cool about this is you can see this is kind of the beginning of a movement. The thing that we saw a few years ago when we did this was by the time we got to the 4th hackathon in the middle of the election season, we were just driving thought and innovation, which of course is what San Francisco does. We have about 2.5 minutes to go before we wind down to happy hour. Why don't we see if we have any kind of audience questions of this panel, or panel we could ask questions of each other. Yes,
I'll,
in our front row
run
here.
the mic. Well, I have one quick
Oh, yes,
question.
go ahead.
Maybe it's not quick. I don't know. For Anthony, have you imagined like the go-to-market strategy for things that are worked on at the hackathon? What do you imagine coming out of that? How would they, the before, the during, and the after? Just curious about that in terms of the hackathon.
Yeah, I think at this stage we just want to make sure that we ask the right questions. The right question to ask is probably what can we build that's most useful for the city. That's actually the main, that's going to be the core judging criteria as well at the hackathon. What is this submission, how useful is this submission for the city if it actually gets implemented after the hackathon. And then we'll work with different organizations, with different departments of the SF government and see if we can actually deploy these tools. And if it gets deployed, then we can see how we will actually sustain that deployment and how to maintain the solution.
I think we had a question here in the first row.
Yeah, I just have logistical questions about the hackathon. More about, we coming up, from what I'm interpreting is we coming up with an idea based on the theme that you've mentioned and pitch that, but also about, forming a team, is it prior, and some of the information that you mentioned that this API data is going to be available, will that details be available prior so we can plan and execute during the hackathon versus, spending time trying to put that together, if you will?
Yeah, that's a great question. So all the applicants that are accepted to the hackathons, there are 200 applicants that were accepted as of today. There are 500 more applicants that are in the pipeline, and we'll review them next week. So all the accepted applicants, they are invited to our Discord server, and they already started discussing these challenges and also the available data that they can use to work on these problems. And following the hackathon, we actually plan to release all of these solutions and open up a discussion about these challenges and how we can work on them following the event.
So I guess a follow-up question is, if people here were interested in getting involved, is it still possible? I heard that you hadn't cut off applications yet, but I guess people would want to, get on the Discord server, find out more about, what they could access, how to do that, and how to plan.
Yeah, so the applications are still open until Tuesday. If you are not planning to apply, or if you miss this deadline, you can also follow us on X. And following the hackathon, we release these solutions on our X account, and you can all interact with them and keep building them or contribute them whatever way you would like to help us.
But if somebody does sign up, they can just show up. They don't have to show up with a team or show up with a plan or an idea. They can just show up and
right.
participate, join a team, take on a challenge. Yeah, so that's the exciting part.
Yeah, that's right. But at the same time, there's also a Discord server where you can interact with other participants and plan ahead of the event.
So start meeting people early.
Yes, exactly.
And to get to the Discord server, you apply, and then you get access to the Discord server?
So first you apply, and if you're accepted, then you are given a link to the Discord server. Yes.
Question for Mickey. Will you be hosting a design thinking sessions for individuals that show up, and we can brainstorm about solutions and then work on teams?
I have no idea, but I have been inviting some designers and design researchers because it would be a pretty healthy thing to do.
Hi, how are you guys planning to offer a participation for underserved groups? Because there's a lot of young people who didn't grow up in privileged households that could go to college. So, and they might not have the ability to be able to apply. Also, people with, difficulty in language, right? So, how are you guys making sure that happens? Because right now it sounds kind of elitist, in a way. So.
So the application form is available for everyone. We actually try to find ways to advertise this hackathon on other platforms other than social media. So, for instance, we posted posters around the city on walls across the city to really enable everyone to apply, particularly in underrepresented areas. There are also a few people around the project who retweeted our tweets and who made sure that they include this opportunity in their newsletters. So really try to make sure that as many people as possible hear about this opportunity.
If I might add to that, based on kind of experience what we did before, what we found was early on what would happen is, you'd invite developers who were slightly monoculture because of kind of bunch of bros out there. You would then bring in, but it would be nonprofits and city service organizations that really understood problems, right? So you'd have someone who worked for an addiction or a homeless nonprofit who were very passionate about what the problems were. They knew their constituency, and those would be the kind of groups that would sit with a hack team and say, okay, these are the real problems we're facing, this is what we're solving for. By the way, I think we're having some supervisors come. So the thing that I would encourage is, and there's a related thing that if you're an underrepresented community, sometimes it's intimidating to come to these things. So I found it took a couple of 2 or 3 sessions of these. Like when we did urban prototyping, the stuff on the street, we were doing stuff on Market Street, and a lot of the local communities, which could be the SRO people or some of the people who live near there, but like the Latin population in the Mission, thought, maybe this isn't for me. By the time we did it a couple of times, they're like, wait a minute, we know what you need to do. And then people were showing up, which is why I think early on, particularly over the next week, people who are in social service organizations, run nonprofits, are advocates, are clear about problem sets, are really great representatives to come, and those are the kind of groups that I encourage.
I'd also say bring somebody that's 10 or 20 years older than you or younger than you. Because I think there is an ageism that happens as well, which is, everybody at the age of 17 or something or 23 thinks that they know all the answers, and they don't. We don't. I mean, the last project that I ran, I did what was called exit level, entry level intern program. And I had somebody that was 20-something be my boss. I gave them the budget, and they ran the program. And I was like, I'm an intern, and it worked out great. And at one point, she was telling me, this is what we're going to do. And I was like, look, I've done this for like 40 years. That's not going to work. And she said, well, I'm the boss. I've got the budget. We're going to do this. And we went and did it, and then it worked because the world changed in the last 40 years, and I didn't know it. So I mean, I think you've got to open your eyes a little bit. That's what I mean when I say hybrid vigor. It's like we don't know where ideas come from, and we don't know where the passion will come from. And she drove the entire thing, and by the end of the time at Autodesk, she now actually works for the strategic foresight team at Autodesk. And she started as an intern. But curiously enough, she presented in front of 250 of the biggest Autodesk customers at the biggest Autodesk University event, not me. Because she was in charge of it, and she was the right one to do it. And I think we have to think we have to open up our aperture.
This is just the perfect question to end on, so thank you. I'll go back to that original insight I had when my colleagues at Gray Area threw that first great hack in 2010. And I didn't know about this stuff. I showed up, and I looked around the room and was like, who are these people, right? Because you had software and hardware types, but all these city activists, because finally we can go to work on something, and then journalists, because journalists were familiar with the problem, understood it, knew where the stories and the data were, right? And then you had artists show up, as well as user experience people, and it was an amazing stew of people, which, like, I never would have cast that. It just surprised me. But I think that's the feeling that we're aiming for here. And I think one of the reasons we wanted to have this conversation today, a week ahead of time, was to have this conversation publicly and then also encourage people. I think that's it. Thank you. We're going to turn it back to Steve, who will explain to us how we get to the future and drinks.
Thank you, everyone. Anthony, Kat, Kim, Mickey, and of course, Peter, thank you very much.